Okay, so how many people are familiar with the talk that Sam brought up, the economics of open source? Okay, cool. So this is kind of a companion piece to go with it. And to frame this a little bit, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking kind of about the same topics that were covered in that talk. I very much encourage you to check that out. It is on JSConf EU's YouTube channel. And then I'm going to move on into some technical deep dive bits about what we're planning to do. So roughly it goes, why should you care about what I'm about to tell you? Here's some things I will get really excitable and nerdy about for a little bit, and then a little bit of project structure and hand waving. So without further ado, companies aren't people. There, it's done. Thank you to our sponsors tonight, and also thank you for the pizza in the space and all of your attention. So why is it important to note this out of the gate? Because even the best companies are not people. They don't work like people. They are financial instruments made out of people and money and process. They are essentially golems, beholden to the words in their head. They exist primarily to turn money into more money for the people that create them. This is a golem. For those of you that are not familiar with the concept, it comes from Jewish folklore. I'm most familiar with it through Terry Pratchett's fantastic Discworld series, which you should definitely check out if you have time. But yeah, that's super cheerful, right? So who gets to put the words that control the golem into the golem's head? Well, for VC-backed startups that don't presently need to turn a buck, that would appear to be, at the top level, the founders. And for a time, the words that they get to put in the golem's head can be wonderful. For example, the words can attract people to work as part of the golem just on that basis. They can say that there's a mission to take JavaScript to the stars, for example. And for a long time, that is how the golem operates. It kind of lurches through this world operating like this. But the deal that the founders made with the people that gave them money to build the golem in the first place means that when the money runs out, the investors get to put new words in the golem's head or hire someone else to. Because again, the golem doesn't exist for any other purpose than to turn money into more money. It's a cheerful talk. So this is where the conflict is. You, me, all of us, we built a commons on a package registry. The biggest repository of interdependent code in recorded history. You can simulate a quadcopter in a voxel world and then use that exact same JavaScript code to fly it in real life. I've seen this happen, and it still blows me away. And in saying this, I'm dating myself because that happened 5 years ago. There are so many more incredible things that have happened since then too. So it's just incredible what we've built there. It's all built on a network of trust and goodwill. This community provided me a living, moved me halfway across the United States. I'm actually from Kansas, hello. And gave me a lot of opportunities I would not have had otherwise. And I think it's incredibly important to make sure that folks who come after me get those same chances, especially if they don't share my privileges. In 2015, I thought it was so important that I joined a golem whose words read, "Keep the registry up." I thought to myself, like many at the time, that this golem would protect and tend our commons. It made some sense. What modern institutions are longer lived than companies? There is, for better or worse, and mostly worse, there's the Dutch East India Company, which still exists as a thing, hundreds and hundreds of years old. At the time, I scoffed at naysayers, including friends who said, essentially, remember, Chris, that's a golem. It exists to turn money into more money. What happens if the money you can generate ethically isn't enough? It wasn't enough, and the words changed. It was alarming how quickly they changed. I left, probably later than I should have, but unfortunately, as you know, bills. The fate of our commons still matters to me a lot. I worry what will happen to the commons in the name of turning money into more money. So my fellow former golem mate, Siege, and I set out to do what we've done for the last 4 years, which is to keep the registry up. But we couldn't take the same approach as before. So here's a curveball. Who owns email? It's kind of strange to ask. All of our development these days is done on GitHub. We communicate on Slack. Decentralized protocols have given way to centralized walled gardens. The pendulum swung one way, and yet email is still here. I suspect it will be here for years to come, even while centralization thrums on top of it. This suggested a course of action. Build a federated registry so that anyone can set their own up. Each node replicates only what is needed to support the packages it hosts. Build a new forward-looking CLI. Take lessons from our years maintaining the commons and use them to inform a new protocol. Take lessons from our experiences with the IOJS and Node projects and use that to build an open source community around the project that can sustain it. And plan on backward compatibility to bring the last 10 years with us into the future. And that's, broadly speaking, Entropic. And that raccoon is called Static. It's from John Q. And there's stickers over there. Really covering all the important points here. We currently have a team of 4 maintainers, myself, Siege, Cat, who is the former CLI architect for NPM, as well as Rebecca, who is the former product manager for the community team of NPM. We have 4 moderators, and a community of collaborators is starting to form. We have 1 proof of concept CLI and another in the works. The registry components are coming together, and what I'm about to describe is half working now and half being designed, which is to say there's a lot of space to get involved, and that's really what this talk is about, is to pique your interest and hopefully get some of you involved. So here's where I get really excitable about code stuff. We're through the really heady part, I think. So how does it work? I'm going to list some invariants at you, and then I'm going to go through and kind of explain what they mean. Our invariants are: a package is identified by a name, namespace, and host. A package is comprised of package versions, named by semver. A package version is comprised of a set of file paths that point at different content addresses and a set of dependencies. Package version contents can never be changed once published. Once depended upon, a package version cannot be deleted. Packages must be able to depend on packages outside of their current registry, so you have to be able to cross these federation bounds. It is not necessary to replicate the full set of packages. So this is kind of an example of what a package might look like. Don't actually hit that URL. It's not up yet. Eventually, I'll run one there, but someday. This space soon. You can see that we are running ds-add registry.neversaw.us Chris Dickinson var int. DS is the name of our new CLI. It stands for entropy delta. It's kind of a nerdy joke about entropy. Right now, that's kind of how we have it arranged. Before this actually kind of looked more like an email, which is kind of a fun type punning on it. It is a bit of a mouthful, so you'll be able to specify aliases in your package manifest. We're doing away with package JSON, and we're replacing it with something called ds.toml. Cat is actually currently focused on making sure that this works as expected. The idea is that you'll be able to grab a source, specify a range, and actually alias it so that you can continue to import and require as usual. So you won't actually see those full specifiers in your JavaScript. They're all mapped in your toml file. With regards to authentication, speaking of GitHub, authentication currently happens through GitHub OAuth. When you set up an Entropic, you set up all the OAuth stuff. You get the secrets and associate them with your app. Once you have logged in, you are presented with a registration page, and you can sign up and then create tokens and namespaces. Once you've logged into an Entropic instance, you can publish. This is one place where I got to take a page from Git. I'm really excited about that. So bear with me here. Boxes. So Git, who's familiar with how Git Clone works? Awesome. And pack files in particular. Awesome. So Git does this really cool thing when you communicate between your client cloning the thing and the server that has the thing. It also does the same dance when you do a Git pull. What it does, one of the things it does when it's creating a pack file, I'll get to the other bits later, is it has a list of all the objects that it needs to send to you. And it will arrange those by type, and then it will arrange those by extension and then file name, and then the directory. And the reason it does this is it actually ends up putting all the things that are most like each other kind of next to each other. And what we can do with this when we publish is we can actually say, okay, this sort order, let's take all these files out of your directory and put them in a multi-part form data body, just like you would use from an HTML form. And we'll put them in that order. And what we can take advantage of is the zlib window. So when you throw this through zlib, there's about 32 kilobytes of a window that happen. And anything that repeats itself within that 32 kilobyte window gets compressed. So if you have things like index.js and index.js that are mostly full of require statements or import statements or something like that, that's going to compress really well when they're next to each other, and a lot less well if it's next to like logo.png. What this means is, like concretely for users, is that uploads will be streaming. There will be no tarballs, and they'll be about 18 to 20% smaller on average, just from rearranging the files so that they compress better. Sorry, that's a complete just me being excited about Git. This happens a bunch. Okay. So I mentioned that packages can never go away. So when you publish a package to your Entropic, like I publish to registry.neversaw.us, Chris Fu, and I depend on something from packages.example.com, a really inventive name, and it depends on siege bar from that. That will be mirrored onto your instance. What this means is that if packages.example.com ever goes away, you'll still have that package. So you're safe from the world changing out from under you, essentially. Packages really can't disappear once they're depended upon. We found this out a really hard way through LeftPad. You might be familiar with that incident. That was like a pretty traumatic experience within the company. So you might ask, you've got this mirror of packages. How do you make sure that the package is what it says on the tin? So what we do is we borrow a little bit from public key cryptography, and we say every Entropic that exists gets its own public-private key pair. Anytime you add a package to it, we'll sign it. Anytime you mirror, you will be registered with a centralized notary using a transparent verifiable log inspired by Go's notary system. That records hostname plus public key. So what this means is that, like, in the event that packages.example.com went away, Notary still has the public key for packages.example.com. You have the content. It has a signature on it. You can verify using that public key. It has been signed with the private key of packages.example.com previous when it was up. You can now verify that, like, yes, this is in fact the content that came from that host because we have that public key. We can still make that attestation. Siege is actually currently, I didn't realize how unhappy this emoji looked until now. Like when it's tiny, it's like, they're just thinking. Siege is actually currently mulling over author package signing, which is kind of the counterpart of this. Like right now we have Entropics themselves signing packages whenever they're added to the service. What author package signing means is that you could associate a namespace on an Entropic with something like a Keybase account. And then you could verify end to end that you're getting the code that the given author wrote, whether you're getting it from packages.example.com or if you're getting it from registry.neversaw.us. The grand vision of this, the hopeful vision of this is that, say you're Substack and you're living on the big island of Hawaii. you would set up your own registry.substack.net because you're publishing packages. You can kind of put them up there. You can kind of open up your own storefront of packages. I say this, and the implication is that you can sell them. I don't have any plans around that. All packages are public by default, but like you can kind of like open up your own gallery, say, of packages. But most users will probably end up using like, sort of in the free node case, like they'll kind of end up using one of several public mirrors of all the packages, public entropics. So if you're publishing packages, you start to think, you start to be concerned with like, I need to get onto my own entropic, essentially. If you're a reader, if you're mostly reading stuff, you don't really need to do that quite so much. So as previously alluded to, there are no more tarballs. Everything is hosted at sub-resource content addresses. What this means is, this is the only thing that's not referenced by a content address. This is the package manifest. Hit a package, and this is what comes back. A package URL, and this is what comes back. You'll see that you have versions pointing at content addresses, and then tags with like latest points at 0.005. That works like a Git reference, like you're familiar with. Also, yanked. Yanked is sort of, just don't display this in a public list. You can't delete the package, but you can at least say like, please, exactly. Package versions look like this. It's a list of files pointing at content addresses. So the nice thing about this, there's also the dependencies. The nice thing about this is that we're aiming for a no installation model, sort of like Tink, or Yarn has a plug and play, I think is what it's called, PNP. This means that files are downloaded on demand when imported. So this means you only download what you need, and once you have it, you never need to download it again. So in the case that like your package, your Entropic server that you were reading from goes away, you have a local copy of all the contents. If you ever installed, you can install forever from there. And we can kind of build tooling around like, okay, I need to resurrect these packages someplace else, which might be a good thing to open up on the forum, actually. This is roughly what the install flow looks like. So it's a network diagram, request diagram. There's that local client cache. As aforementioned, that's sort of like a cache sort of thing. It's content addressable. Once you've downloaded something into it, it never has to change. You never have to refresh it. There is the ability to cache for a limited amount of time for certain content. And we'll do that for the package endpoint. And so that top level thing that changes over time, we'll just like ask every 5 minutes or so. Like whenever it's been more than 5 minutes since you asked for the thing, we'll try to do the stale while revalidate approach. Other than that, everything else is just cache forever. Like once you've got the hash, then you've got the hash. I mentioned bringing the last 10 years of JavaScript with us into the future. And our plan for that is to support legacy packages. And what this means is you can actually add, there's a special namespace called legacy that acts as a portal into the NPM registry. You could add sort of the lengthy name. We're kind of debating whether or not to add this shortcut where you just ds add Lodash. What this means is like as soon as you request one of these, it will pull in the tarball, all the tarballs, all the pacuments, and turn them into Entropic packages hosted on your Entropic. Yes? Namespaces can exist in that. So legacy is actually like a special cased namespace that allows special characters in package names. Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be a legacy namespace. Yeah, we kind of want to get away from those. NPM called them scopes. Yeah, they were kind of a really clever hack around constraints in CouchDB around what you could URL encode and treat as a document in CouchDB. And I think with things like GitHub Enterprise, or not GitHub Enterprise, GitHub's new package registry product, it gets kind of confusing to deal with like all those @scope names. So you probably won't see that @ sign for Entropic packages, just for like legacy stuff. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you throw it behind a firewall, and then it's your private Entropic. One note about this is that this means that every Entropic may end up with its own copies of legacy packages. But this actually turns out to be a wash because everything is stored in a content addressable database. So like you're storing maybe like a kilobyte of overhead per replicated packages. Like if you have registry.neversaw.us/legacy/lodash and you have packages.example.com/legacy/lodash, you're only storing like the couple kilobytes of that top level package listing. Because they will end up with the same hashes. So they'll be keyed by that hash. All the content will be keyed by that hash. And since all the versions will have the same hashes as well, that version 0.005, like both of them will point at the same content hash. And then all of this will point at the same content hash. Sort of the same thing as what Git's doing. Yeah, so you can have like 15 things all referring to the same file. Yes. Yes. And like the server's storage as well is also addressed by this hash, this object ID. So if you had, for example, two packages that were completely unrelated but had the same file in them, that file would be deduplicated in your storage. You'd only have it once. So the Entropic to Entropic syncing thing, this is the thing that I'm chewing on right now. And I'm going to be very hand-wavy about this. The idea is roughly that when one Entropic first connects to another Entropic to sync a package, when you first publish a package that depends on somebody else's, we'll do something like an SSH known host thing, like a trust on first use, with a little bit of Go's notary system mixed in. So what will happen is that we have these three players. We have Bob, Alice, and the notary. Bob will first connect to the notary, which will see if it has a record for Alice. And if it doesn't, it will go ask Alice for Alice's public key and record it in a transparent, verifiable log. This is a like Merkle tree sort of log. I will make a link available for what all that is. It's a really, really fascinating like data structure. Hypercore and IPFS is built on that. What this means is that if Alice lies to the notary, Alice has to keep up that lie forever. What will then happen is Bob will have the public key from the notary, Alice's public key from the notary. Bob will then connect to Alice and say, please sign this nonce. And what we'll do with that is we'll say, okay, yes, you do actually in fact have the private key for this public key. Like we'll decrypt that nonce again or we'll verify the signature on that nonce with the public key, and we'll say, okay, cool, you are definitely Alice. Public key crypto. What happens next is something a lot more like Git Clone. This is where like that Merkle tree replication thing comes in, where you can say like given a tree of content hashes, you can say like given the roots of that tree up here, what content hashes I have versus what they have, and you can get the minimal set of new objects transferred. Bob will do this by way of saying like, hey, I have this package, I have these versions. Alice will respond with any new versions, and since Alice also has those old versions, she knows what data Bob already has. So only new files will come in. So like if you changed one file in a version, you're only going to get that one file when it syncs again. I had the opportunity around 2014, 2015 to be a part of the Node project around the time of the IO.js split. So I was kind of there for when we were forming up the first working groups and like what bits of that worked and what bits of that didn't. So I have a surreptitious goal with Entropic, which is to make it a sustainable open source project, which is to say nobody should feel anxiety or fear about missing out on decisions or having to keep up with the issue tracker. There was one of the experiences that I got to have that informs this was opening a PR to add promises to Node Core, where I had to moderate that thread for 24 hours straight. And that was a horrible experience. So we're consciously steering away from that. The things that we're trying to do in that realm are to say, we're not going to make decisions over the weekends. we are going to have a core team of moderators from the start. Those moderators aren't expected to work every day. Like, we should pick shifts so that nobody's like having to keep up with the tracker or Discord or discourse 24/7, and kind of trying to figure out ways to divide the work better. So right now we only have those two teams. We have maintainers, people with a commit bit on the project, and we have moderators. The other thing that I experienced from the Node project was that process actually has to here. Well, let me back up and take a running start at this. For process to work, it kind of has to start by describing something that people are already doing. You have to like look at a cow path and say, let's describe it, and then we're going to try and coax it. Otherwise, you kind of build these sort of castles in the sky. And the early Node project kind of had a lot of these. That's why there are so many like uppercase yelling.md documents in the top level of the Node project. I think that's kind of like reduced now. They've kind of gotten a handle on it. But what we're trying to do is kind of grow slowly and grow in a organic fashion so that like the process that we describe right now, we have maintainers and moderators. The plan is not to stay that way forever. What we want to do is we want to eventually become more like Rust's working groups, where there's no real central decision body. There are people with scopes of concerns. That's not going to happen overnight, or probably in the next few months, but that's kind of the long-term goal. Probably the first divisions that will kind of happen in the next couple of months, once we have a simple working system, are to kind of split into a CLI team and a registry team. Maybe an infra team from there as well. But until that point, it's just maintainers, moderators. We're working on making it easier to join the maintainers team. We really want people to like pitch in and feel ownership over this. Right now, the maintainers team meets fortnightly, so every 2 weeks, because bi-monthly is really hard to disambiguate. And with that, I used an online QR code generator, so hopefully this points at discourse.entropic.dev. That is the forum. Discourse is our forum. Discord is our chat. And we also have GitHub. The primary place for discussions is the discourse, and that will let you get pretty much everywhere else.